Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Affirmations. And as you know, this webinar is based on this book, Affirmations for Self-Healing by Swami Kriyananda. And every week we take an affirmation and we focus on it for an entire week. And so this week's affirmation is forgiveness. So we'll start with the little reading at the beginning of this chapter. Forgiveness is the sword of victory. When we forgive those who seek to hurt us, we rob them of their very power to do us harm. Better still, if they respond with love, they will unite their strength to ours, and so our strength becomes doubled. But forgiveness should not be given primarily for its effect on others, but rather for the freedom it affirms in our own hearts. Let no outward circumstance condition your inner happiness. Be not pleased merely when man is pleased. Be pleased, rather, when you feel God's pleasure in your heart. And so we can do the affirmation together now. First, in a loud voice. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now in a normal voice. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now in a whisper. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now let's do this mentally, taking it into the subconscious mind. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now let's do it again, taking it into the superconscious mind. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And this is the prayer that Swamiji's written for this particular affirmation. Lord, how often the hurts that I've sustained in life have grieved me. Strengthen my power of love, that I surrender all things to Thee, my eternal friend. I'll now turn it over to Devarshi.
This topic of forgiveness is a very important one. I think it's something that you will find that if you can win great victories of forgiveness, you will be free just in that very act. And I would really encourage you this week to take it up as a practice. I'll talk about it a little bit more at some point, but find someone who you need to forgive and work on it this week in the ways that I'm going to talk about. Don't aim too high for someone who has hurt you severely, the worst maybe, because some things can take a lifetime to learn how to forgive. But someone who has hurt you and something that's doable, and learn this practice of forgiveness as a very powerful, liberating, very dynamic practice. The greatest act of forgiveness that we read about, one of the great moments sort of in spiritual history, is when Christ was crucified. For those who don't know the story well, when Christ was crucified on the cross, he had nails put through his hands, he was beaten and whipped, he had to carry his own wooden cross up this steep hill through the town of Jerusalem, and he was ridiculed and people yelling at him on the streets as he was being whipped and beaten and bloodied. And then they put the cross in the ground and they put him up and they nailed his feet and his hands. They put a big spear through his side to finally kill him. They put a crown of thorns on his head, and he was bleeding. And in the midst of that, he found the power of forgiveness. And what he showed us is that forgiveness is not a passive thing. It's not a sort of a surrender. It's not a wimpy thing of, okay, I forgive you. Yeah, you hurt me, and I'll let go of it. No, his forgiveness was the divine forgiveness. And he said, as his last words, he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And there was an outpouring of love from him. And the stories of those people who actually killed him, they apparently became disciples because they felt this outpouring of divine love coming from Christ. And so the real forgiveness, when we learn how to practice it, is very dynamic, very powerful. This is what I've seen in my own life. That yes, it can be good to let go and to say, okay, you've hurt me and I know I'm supposed to forgive, and God forgive them. But I find it hard in my heart to forgive the person, but okay, I'm taught to love and give. And that's sort of a passive way. It's a good first step, but that's more of a surrender. And I have found that when forgiveness, when the emphasis is on that last part of that word, the giveness part, give, that when it's just a pure giving and it's not an act of kind of letting go of a hurt and just kind of, because there's still some holding on in that regard. And so try to find a way to practice this pure giving of your heart of love to someone who has hurt you in some way. You don't have to go up to them and say, I forgive you. It can be private, and I think in some ways is better and more powerful when it's private and interior between you and God. But if you can do it in this dynamic, powerful way, you will find that it's very, very healing. It's not just healing, it's liberating. It's the way to go beyond pain, and the way to go beyond grief is this act of pure giving. You know, it's interesting because I've never been crazy about this word forgive, because it has that implication of kind of passivity and surrender and letting go and saying, oh, okay, I'll be the one to say I'm sorry. You know, you have an argument with your spouse or a friend and you're the one who comes and says, okay, I'm sorry I said that, and you accept that. Maybe you at least acknowledge that you were wrong. Maybe you don't believe it, but just to make the peace. But in fact, forgiveness, really when it's done the way I'm talking about, has the power of divine love and divine grace behind it. So I was just looking up this word, forgive, because I was always curious, because I always felt the power of it rather than the sort of the wimpiness of it. And what I read was very interesting. This was just before we came on here, that about 500 years ago, up to that point, the word only had one real meaning. And the root of that word, the for part, and the give part is obvious, but the for part is complete give, completely give, complete giving, is the real meaning of that word. And there's no sense of having to let go, and only later on to have that connotation of weakness and softness in that way. But it's very, very powerful. And I have found that the answer to all grief, all pain, all hurts, is giving love. Here's something that Paramahansa Yoganandaji said. He said, the ways of error are endlessly winding, but the way out of error is direct. A few simple rules will suffice, and the most important of these is simply this: love God. And then he quotes Christ. He says, to one who loves much, Jesus said, much is forgiven. And you'll see that forgiveness is also sort of a selfish thing, because when you forgive others, your own sins and karmas are forgiven. But in fact, I think you will see that those who are judgmental and harsh and hard on others, they're equally hard on themselves. And I've seen this. There's an unhappiness there. And you will find that if you can start to see God in others, forgive people their faults, their ways that they hurt you, you'll find that it's much easier to forgive yourself. And it's not that God forgives us more easily. In fact, God loves us unconditionally and forgives us no matter what. But it's us ourselves who judge ourselves less harshly and are able to let go of our own weaknesses and faults and understand that we are children of the light. And just like that person who hurts us is a children of the light. And so try to see forgiveness as a very conscious, dynamic, very powerful act of giving love to those who have hurt you. Not for any reason, but to be in tune with the divine. Because if we want to become truly free, to become one with God, in some ways the best way to get there is to start acting, giving, feeling in the way that God feels, the Divine Mother, the Heavenly Father, the great masters. And you will find that when you can love and give unconditionally, with this outpouring of love, of just giving with no thought of what's in it for me, or doing it just to those who are nice to you, and not so much to those who are not so nice to you, but to love all with God's love. Because we've all been in error for many, many lifetimes, for many millions of lifetimes. And our Creator, Father, Mother, loves us unconditionally, no matter what. All of God's children, equally loving and giving to them. And if we can start to be that way, and not just meter it out to those who are good to us and hold back to those who are unkind to us, you'll find that you start to get into this flow of divine grace, and you start to be a channel for this divine grace. But you also find that when you feel pain, when you feel grief, suffering, sadness, when you've been hurt, that if you can give love in a very dynamic way of just radiating and being a channel for love to all, to God, if you can't love the person, then give the love to God. I have found in my own life that the way out of even extreme physical pain, and that was causing intense, even suffering, that the way out was to give my love to God and hold nothing back and not blame God for inflicting this on me or creating me, but just to give that love. And it creates a flow of energy that expands from the heart. Whereas when we feel hurt, when we feel pain, when we feel hurt that someone has given to us, it's contractive. It makes us feel smaller, more little, and we start to contract, and the opposite of expansion is contraction, and the goal of divine union requires that divine expansion of becoming one with God. So try to be in this Christ-like way of just giving love to all, whether they hurt you, whether they're kind to you. Try to feel that you are acting as an instrument of this divine love, and try to see this forgiveness as the real meaning of the word, which is complete giving.
Hi everyone. So one of the easiest ways to understand why we should forgive absolutely everyone is that most people are living in ignorance, that Christ's words, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," is saying that most people just have no idea what they're doing in this incarnation. They don't know that they're here to find God. They're not aware of the fact of how their actions impact other people. And therefore, if they're not aware on that level, they're certainly not going to be aware of higher levels and higher things. Another really motivating reason and this is an attitude that we need to cultivate of forgiveness. I hope I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the next reason we really need to do this is we do not want to take these hurts into our next incarnation. And they will stick with us for as many incarnations as we want. They'll stick with us as we go into the astral world. At some point, we have to heal all hurts. And these hurts are within our own self. And it's possible that in a relationship with another human being, that they're still going to hate you like anything and never forgive you. and perhaps you still feel that they did the wrong thing. But with what we started with, you can still forgive them because they don't know exactly what they're doing. And a very important point is you can forgive and love the individual even though you still consider his action wrong. And it's very important to differentiate between those two, that the person is not his action that was made in ignorance, because the person is a reflection of God. Another thing to contemplate on this topic is when we begin to realize that this whole world is really just a reflection of our own self, there's not much to hate anymore. That when we have this finger shaking like this, there's a saying that, well, 3 fingers are pointing back. You did this. But if you really look at yourself and your motives and your thoughts and your feelings, that you'll see that usually that's just a reflection of your own self. And if you can learn to forgive that other person, as Devarshi ji was saying, you can learn to forgive yourself. And when you learn to forgive yourself, those reflections somehow seem to mysteriously vanish. A nice practice is as you fall asleep at night to take all of your attachments, perhaps you know this, and cast them into a blue mental bonfire at night. And so all of the stresses of the world, all of the things that you fear or that you think you just have to have, that just remember that you're a soul and that this physical world is not your home. You are not this physical body, and just try to let it all go. But we can add to this that if we feel that there's people who've hurt us, we can forgive them in our hearts. As Devarshi was saying, this is primarily an inward transformation that we have to make. And earlier I was saying that this needs to become an attitude. So as we breeze through life, soar through life, float on the wings of God's grace through life, that it's with this attitude where we always have a kindness, a love within our hearts that will always be forgiving towards people. You know, if you do a lot of good in this world, you'll notice if you study history that a lot of the people that have been assassinated were doing a lot of good in this world. And it makes one wonder, oh my gosh, well, if I do a lot of good, am I going to be assassinated? Not necessarily. But it is something to consider that Master said living for God is martyrdom. But we have to understand that in the highest sense. It doesn't mean that if you turn your life over to God that this physical body of yours is now going to be tortured and killed. What that statement means is that we have to let go of ego. And as we can learn to let go of ego, we can then learn to forgive absolutely everyone. But the point that I was really trying to make here on this is that as you do more good, people are going to hate you. People are going to criticize you. It's just a part of duality. But we can't let that into our hearts, that we just have to still stand up for our principles and be strong, but then just forgive and just keep moving on and keep moving forward. And so we are doing this series on affirmations because I hope that you have realized, that we all have realized, that we can consciously start to program, for lack of a better word, our subconscious mind, and we can start to become more aware of our conscious mind. And in doing this, it takes this conscious effort to pay attention to our thoughts, our subconscious thoughts, our conscious thoughts, and then start to see that we have attitudes, we have thoughts that go through where it clearly seems to be the other guy's fault and we're just a god. Of course it's the other guy's fault. But when we really look at these thoughts, we realize you see the thoughts, but what you really do is you feel. How do these thoughts make me feel? And we see that these thoughts don't make us feel so nice when we are always feeling that it's the other guy's fault and that he's the bad person in the situation and that, of course, we're taintless and pure and perfect. And so with affirmations, we can go through and start to cleanse ourselves and become more and more pure. And why do we want to forgive? Because then we can fall asleep at night in a peaceful state. And more than just falling asleep at night, that we can live our entire life in a peaceful state. In this affirmation we're going to do in a few more minutes, that one of the aspects of it is that we can accept that whatever's coming to us is coming to us for our own good. And that also is an attitude of understanding that God is doing absolutely everything. So if bad things are coming to us, it's an interesting thing to think about. But I do think that some people are angry with God and they haven't forgiven God. That perhaps God killed one of their loved ones, or perhaps God gave them some disease that they had to suffer with for how many years. It's easy when these difficult things happen to say, how could God do this? But if we can try to understand more deeply why God does these things and see that there's a lesson in it for us, then we can forgive God. And there's an interesting correlation between forgiving God and forgiving ourselves, and learning to love God, learn to love our own selves. And as this transformation happens, we have to consciously keep putting energy into it, but we are just going to become more and more free until absolutely no matter that what happens in the outer world, that it can't affect who we truly are on the inside. It can't affect now this new loving relationship that we have with God, that's really, really all that we have in this world. I'm going to end with this. For whatever reason, the last few weeks, this thought, why were you born as a human being, has just been coursing through my mind. And the answer, there's only one answer, and that is to love God. That's the only reason that you were born as a human being. And everything else, it just ends up as dust. So this forgiveness is part of loving everything, absolutely loving everything unconditionally. I'll hand it back over now to Devarshi and we'll do these affirmations.
And again, I would like to just encourage you to really make forgiveness not just an affirmation and a study this week, but a very dynamic and active practice of forgiving one or more people and experimenting with this act of giving, especially the complete giving of love to someone who has hurt you in some way. We'll go through this reading and affirmation again. Forgiveness is the sword of victory. When we forgive those who seek to hurt us, we rob them of their very power to do us harm. Better still, if they respond with love, they will unite their strength to ours, and so our strength becomes doubled. But forgiveness should not be given primarily for its effect on others, but rather for the freedom it affirms in our own hearts. Let no outward circumstance condition your inner happiness. Be not pleased merely when man is pleased. Be pleased rather when you feel God's pleasure in your heart. And of course, the way to feel God's pleasure, freedom, and love in your heart is to love and forgive others. We'll now practice this affirmation together, and we'll repeat it several times. The first 3 times, we'll do it very, very loudly to grab our conscious attention. All that befalls me is for my good. You can repeat after me. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. Still very loudly, all that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. Now a little bit more quietly to absorb the meaning of the words. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. Still absorbing the meaning very deeply. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now more quietly, whispering to start to absorb the meaning in the subconscious mind. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now mentally taking it more deeply into the subconscious mind. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And now again mentally, but offering it up to the spiritual eye as you mentally say this, to that source of superconsciousness there. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. All that befalls me is for my good. I welcome any hurts that I receive as opportunities to grow in understanding. And mentally listening to this prayer. Lord, how often the hurts that I have sustained in life have grieved me. Strengthen my power of love that I surrender all things to Thee, my eternal friend. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week with another affirmation. And again this week, repeat the affirmation, study the reading, try to absorb it very deeply, and make it even a practice this week to practice forgiveness. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.